All right. Well, welcome everyone. I'm Sean Doheny. I'm the industry liaison to the Informs Military and Security Society. I'll be moderating today's webinar where Dr. Zhang will be sharing more with us about his paper on designing response supply chain against bioattacks. Excuse me. So I'd like to encourage everyone to connect with us on these handles here on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. And if you enjoy today's webinar, please let us know. If you have any suggestions for future webinars, we welcome those recommendations as well. We'd love to hear from you and connect with you so that we can continue to give back to the larger military and national security, ops research, and management sciences communities. As I mentioned, the session is being recorded and will be posted on our YouTube page so that you can go back to it if you miss something, or you can share it with others if you find today's webinar helpful. We plan to post these slides there as well as on our Informs Connect page if you're an Informs member. Next, I'd like to introduce Dr. Natalie Scala. Dr. Scala is the president of the Military and Security Society and an associate professor and graduate program director at Townsend University in the Business Analytics and Technology Management Department. I'll turn over the reins to her to say a few words about our society and to introduce our speaker. Welcome, Dr. Scala.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Typically, we have this session during the annual meeting, but our little bit of a virtual format changed this year. We thought it'd be nice to see everyone present live in a webinar format, so we have an opportunity for discourse and questions and to build community as well. So what is this community? So this is a military and security society of Informs, and we seek to foster development, dissemination, implementation, knowledge, technologies, research, all about within this military and security framework. So typically in this space, we've seen a lot of in the past, military and former military researchers presenting their work, but we've also broadened the scope in the last few years to look at our friends working in general security, homeland security, policing, national security, intelligence, things like that as well. And this is open internationally as well. So typically we do have a lot of US and Canadian representation within our organization through Informs, but anyone who is an Informs member, or really anyone who's not even an Informs member, but just generally interested in this problem space area, can join this group. So we share our knowledge, we learn, we develop, and we do have a series of awards. And one of these awards that we're specifically focusing on today is the Koopman Prize. So I do welcome you to join us if you are not currently a member of MASS. And here are some benefits of joining, and if you already are a member, becoming more active in the society. It is a great network. I have said this multiple times at multiple Informs events. The two jobs that I've had, so this job I have right now at Towson University, as well as a previous job I had in the United States government, came through Informs Career Center, and also as well as through my networks, including this network in MASS. So there are a lot of interesting problems. You can meet researchers, expand your knowledge. We have a lot of webinars throughout the year as well. So it's an opportunity for you to engage either live during the webinar or delayed later when watching the recording as well. And this is the Koopman Prize. So this is an award, an honorarium for the best published paper or report on military operations research topics directly related to these military and security goals of MASS. And we honor here Bernard Koopman, who is a pioneer in the field of operations research that talked with Orsa and TIMS to form Informs. Dr. Koopman served as an operations research liaison between the U.S. Department of Defense and the United Kingdom and NATO. So he played a critical role in making operations research a permanent activity within NATO. And this year's winner, the paper is Designing Response Supply Chain Against Bioattacks. Here is a link to it on the screen. which I know is a little bit of a longer link if you're trying to write it down. But you can also search for it in Inform's flagship journal, Operations Research, and it appeared in the September-October 2019 issue. So this year's Koopman Prize 2020 honors papers published in 2019. We'll be sending out a call soon or in springtime for papers published this year if you're interested in applying for next year's paper award. But our presenters today and our award winners this year are David, Nicholas, and Peter from MIT and CMU. And I'll turn it over to Peter to go ahead and present his research.
Thank you, Natalie and Sean. Actually, can I use my, yes, I'll share my screen here. All right, okay. I think everyone can see my slides. If not, please let me know. All right. Very happy to be here. It's a pleasure and honor to be speaking at this seminar and the Koopman Prize presentation. And I appreciate the consideration that you wanted to have a live session for talking about this paper other than a recorded session at Informs this year. And welcome everyone. Thank you for joining. This is already a bigger audience than I usually have in my course. I have 39 students in my course and 17 of them show up every lecture. Very excited. So I am an assistant professor at Carnegie Mellon University. And this work is in collaboration with my former advisors from MIT, David Simchi-Levi and Nikolaos Trichakis, who is online today. And the paper is titled Designing Response Supply Chain Against Bioattacks. And so the title is fairly self-evident in terms of the content of the work, but I want to unpack a little bit here. So first of all, we're talking about public health emergencies, in particular bioattacks. This work was done prior to COVID, to everything. It was published in 2019. But I think the work can, in some sense, be extended in the public health, in general public health emergency response. But of course, there's some major differences between bioattacks and pandemic like we're experiencing at the moment. And I welcome your thoughts in thinking about how what the difference is and what are the key assumptions that we have to change within this model in order to extend it to a slightly different scenario within public health. So let me start by just giving a very quick description of what we mean by bioattack and how we define it here. And by the way, if you want to raise any questions, feel free to interrupt me at any time. I think the talk is about, the content is going to be 30 to 40 minutes. So we'll have some time for discussion, both during and after the presentation. Okay, so bioattack is basically an intentional release of pathogens against humans to cause illness and death. And there are two different characteristics that we highlight and that stand out from this particular emergency. One is that usually a small quantity of bacteria or pathogens can affect large population. And for example, this small quantity can be released airborne over a large populated city, or it can be released in a well-ventilated system, but with shared airways. And the second characteristic of bioattack that we're talking about is that there's a very short treatment time window. For example, if we are, let's say for the case of anthrax, this is a type of bacteria that can stay dormant in soil, in different natural environment for years or even decades. And they can transmit through animals, or they can be harvested adversarially and transported and released to human population. And once humans come in contact with them, for example, through inhalation, then the bacteria start attacking cells within our body, for example, lungs. And by short treatment time window, and in the case for anthrax, is the survival probability drops significantly as we go on from the time of infection. So this graph here, taken from a book from National Academy Press, this graph basically shows the survival probability drop as a function of the time between infection and treatment. And this is in number of hours on the horizontal axis. And then if we look at the scale on the vertical axis, we see a pretty significant, non-trivial at least, drop in survival probability within a couple of days. So this is a very severe kind of demand shock in terms of medical care. And so, by the way, and this probably is one differentiating factor between bioattack cases that we're talking about here versus a pandemic. Okay, so these two characteristics, one that's a large scale or a large population can be affected at a single time point, and the second characteristic that the treatment time window could be very short. Both call for a response action that is very responsive. And in other words, there has to be some kind of preparation ahead of time in order to be reasonably prepared to deploy things fast. So a good thing is CDC and many other government agencies have been preparing against this kind of disasters over the years. For example, in 2016, there has been 18 full-scale exercises in terms of field experiments, deploying medical personnel, volunteers to be trained in order to facilitate dispensing and transportation and administration of drugs during this kind of situation. And a lot of people were involved in this kind of exercises, thousands of responders across many different areas. And this is just within the United States. And if we go online, you can actually find publicly available documents and information about specific bioattack scenarios, and also how CDC and other agencies are preparing against this kind of situation. And there are, of course, a lot of biomedical papers that focus on the disease pathogen characteristics of bioattacks and pathogen transmission pathways, for example. So combining all of these, understanding that this could be a potentially disastrous event, and also the fact that there's also a lot of investment into this, into the studying of preparation against this kind of events, both financially and academically, and also policy-wise. It was a little bit surprising to us when we were looking at this problem that CDC was mentioning that there was a lack of modeling activity, especially modeling activity that covers the end-to-end flow of materials, measures of cost, measures of health, and also covering different physical sites, inventory, as well as logistics. So that gave us, in some sense, an opportunity to look at this problem from a operations research and supply chain angle. Yeah, but a lot of people have studied this problem, and this is one stream of literature from I think the public health literature and operations research literature here. So what I'm listing out is a set of decisions in the green font, a set of decisions that we, if we think about public health officials, can decide prior to or after events like this. And I'm laying out the decisions in a two-dimensional way, so in this matrix. Every column corresponds to a set of decisions at a particular time point. Right, so the first column would correspond to more strategic decisions, the ones that are happening or decided prior to much earlier than any adversarial event. And these are what we call strategic decisions or long-term decision or first stage decisions. And then the last column corresponds to reaction decisions. So these are the things that we scramble to do or try to do our best job with in terms of operationally after something happens, after attack happens. And if we look at this set of decisions horizontally, so every horizontal slice of this table corresponds to decisions happening with regard to one particular type of physical occasion. For example, we can think about portfolio selection for drugs and quantity selection for drugs at a federal stockpile. So this is a medical or inventory stockpile being managed on the federal level, and that those materials can be shipped to anywhere within the United States, for example, within 12 hours. Whereas if we talk about, we look at the fourth line, points of dispense. So these are the physical setups, usually, for example, in a public location at a public high school gymnasium, points of dispense that can be prepared in terms of having contingency plans laid out and people trained to how to lay out this gym and parking lot on a regular basis, so that if anything happens, there's a way to design and also deploy emergency contingency plan in a very efficient and responsive way. But what we want to, one note that I want to add here is that there has been a lot of works in this area, but not too many are focusing on a comprehensive end-to-end overview, systematic view of all the decisions at the same time. I listed out a few papers here that corresponds to different slices of this decision matrix. This is not an exhaustive list. There are many different great works out there, but I think this is representative of what was happening academically before our research project. So what we aspired to do was to say, can we do a end-to-end quantitative model for the design of responsive supply chains in order to minimize impact from this kind of bio-attack demand shocks. And indeed, that's what we accomplished. Our contributions include the modeling activity, so integrative model for this end-to-end problem, covering both multiple stages of time temporally, also many levels of physical locations and organizations. And we also provide a tractable solution heuristic. We didn't invent it, but we apply one that's from the literature. But what's interesting is that we also show the precision of this approximation technique. And in our case, we call that the optimality of this heuristic. So this heuristic, being tractable, can also give us actual optimal solution under some technical conditions. And lastly, we conduct this case study that showcases the methodology and compares the results we find, given our methodology, with the ones that are generated in the publication. In particular, I'm going to show a book that's from the National Academies Press and what they did in order to try to understand and compare different supply chain design strategies. And we're saying that the solution technology we have is a good complement to the analysis they have to give a better, fuller picture of what can be achieved in terms of the Pareto efficiency frontier, for example, for cost and healthcare benefits. And another thing is I'm not writing on a slide, and is not within this single paper itself, but some of the results that we have here can be generalized into more interesting theoretical results in the robust optimization literature. And me and my collaborators are currently working on papers to wrap that up, and hopefully we'll be able to show that in the next year or so. Okay. So let's show some animations, and let's make this more intuitive. So this is so what I'm trying to show is the physics of the problem. So let's say that we have this kind of physical setup layer. So this is an input of the problem. The factory looking things are the locations for stockpiles or locations for distributing inventories. And then arcs I'm showing are abstract representations of the transportation pathways between different locations. And I'm laying out these locations in a hierarchical order. So we have federal stockpile at the top. It doesn't have to be a single stockpile, it can be multiple. And the state level stockpiles, for every state, there's one or more stockpiles to receive inventories from the federal level, as well as distributing and reorganizing things downstream. And then there can be county level stockpile, neighborhood stockpile, etc. And I'm using these stick figures, or these blue people here, to represent basically population. So you can think of the size of the groups as the size of the population. And I'm using blue to say they're currently healthy. Okay. So in terms of decisions, so given the setup, the decisions are, so in the beginning, we have to decide what quantity and what types of materials, drugs, for example, to be stored in different locations. And also we have to decide on the capacity of dispensing, in the sense that we have to keep a regular training schedule, as an annual training schedule for medical personnel, for volunteers, to know how to execute certain plans, contingency plans during emergency. And this is not a trivial task. As I was talking to the public health officials here in Pittsburgh, they were saying that that's actually one of their biggest problems, because there's never a record of who they trained in the past year, because people come and go always, and rotation is fast, and people change jobs, and there's no clear record of the capacity of this medical dispensing activity in a supply chain like this. So constantly they have to invest and investigate. Okay. And so these two decisions, the inventory decision as well as the capacity decision, are what we call strategic decisions, or first stage decisions. And at some point, if the adversarial event happens, let's say some parts of some populations are affected, and that turn them into orange people, then hopefully there's enough medicine and enough capacity to transport and administer these medicines in order to save as many people as possible. Yeah. Okay. And but in many cases, or in some cases, we might have a delay in distributing these medicines or administering the medicines. And also, maybe we can't even reach some population. So at the end of the day, there's going to be some adverse health effects, let's say deaths, casualties here. So if we put together all the decisions as well as the demand shock here, we can write them out in a symbolic way. So X, so I'm going from the top, the middle top here. So Xi is inventory quantity that we say at location I. So this is a first stage strategic decision. And Uij is another strategic decision that denotes the dispensing capacity from I to J. Let's say the number of doses per hour that can be dispensed at that particular link. And the second stage decisions are F and S, and they are contingent on the demand scenario, because we're assuming that a demand scenario happens, and then we can make decisions to ship things and treat people. So the flow decision, Fij, and then the counting variable that takes care of, accounts for how many people are untreated or not treated very well. They both depend on D here. So Fij and Sj are functions of D. And Fij in particular talks about the number of doses or the quantity of inventory shipped from location I to location J under this particular demand scenario D. And Sj is the, let's say, unserved demand at location J under demand scenario D. So overall, what we can talk about in order to understand the health effect, adverse health effect, under any particular design strategy X and U, and the particular demand scenario D, can be compactly written within, let's say, a function G. So G of XUD is the calculation of demand loss, or what is the health loss under a particular demand scenario D, and also under the particular design strategy X and U here. And this would, so the function, so the reason I'm assigning this a function is that we're going to use this as a channel for us to conduct our analysis and talk about how to solve this problem. And so let's maybe just give it a slightly more intuition of what G is. And by the way, I'm suppressing the dependence on XU here in order to just focus on the fact that this is a function of D. So and it's intuitive that because health loss or whatever demand loss is a function of the demand scenario. So I implicitly gave a illustration in the animation that in order to understand this, the demand loss under any demand scenario, we can do a network flow minimization problem. So if we do a min cost flow problem on the network, we can understand what is the lower bound, for example, of health loss under any particular demand scenario D. And this is just a simple minimization problem. This is an LP parameterized by this parameter D here. So the D again is the vector of demand. But from another perspective, G is also a nonlinear function of D. And we can talk about the characteristics and structure of this function. For example, it should probably be a convex based on the global sensitivity analysis in LP. But we'll talk about more of the features in a few slides. And I also want to spend one slide on understanding what the potential demand scenarios are. Because if we're talking about designing a strategy in order to hedge against particular actions from the attacker, we'll have to definitely find a way to at least calibrate and model the attacker's strategy set for the attacker. We can change this set from instance to instance to understand what the impact of that is, but we have to nonetheless give it some kind of structure to start. Okay. So one characteristic, just from naturally observing this kind of a situation, is that there's a lack of historical data for demand scenario set D, because there's no historical data on that in terms of large scale bioattack. And also, attacker doesn't really act like nature. So that means there's not going to be sort of a probabilistic description of scenarios arising from the support set D, but maybe it's going to be something more adversarial. And also from the policymaker's point of view, policymakers think about attackers having limited resources, and therefore they also think about the mentality that we want to have worst case guarantees against attackers that have such limited resources. And we're not inventing this. This is something that we quoted from a document from the Division of Strategic National Stockpile Program Review, report from their Board of Scientific Counselors. And they were saying that they wanted to design this stockpile system in order to defend against 3 simultaneous attacks or simultaneous events in 3 cities. I don't know why they chose the number 3, but this is one generic way to describe that we have. There's a limited budget from attacker, and then we want to be safe against attackers that have such level of budgets. Okay, so that's a description of demand scenario D. And what we then can put together is that we can think of this whole thing, if you remember the decision matrix, as a sequence of events happening. So in the first stage, the strategic decisions are taken by defenders to defend, in preparation against future events. And here, X and U, the inventory and capacity decisions, are the defender strategic decisions or first stage decisions. And D here, drawn from the demand scenario that we just talked about, is the attacker's strategy set and attacker's decision, D, after which there's going to be reactions from the defender to ship things, to treat people, and eventually there's going to be loss, health loss. And so this everything happens sequentially, and we can write it as a optimization program like this. Right. So as soon as we're writing down this, we're making a lot of assumptions here. One thing is that we are assuming that attacker and defender are working against the same objective, where defender is trying to minimize health loss and attacker is going to wanting to maximize health loss. This may not be the most general description for all scenarios, but let's say let's stick with this for this particular model at this moment. Okay. And also recall that G itself is a minimization problem, parameterized by D here. So overall, this is a min-max-min problem. Min-max-min with linear objective and linear constraints. And this is part of so this can be actually thought of as different types of problems. One way is to think of this as a robust optimization problem. So a classical robust optimization is a min-max problem. So there's a minimization decision, and then that's done with regard to the worst case of whatever adversarial decision. So that's going to be a min-max problem. But here we have min-max-min. So this falls under what's called a 2-stage robust optimization or adjustable robust optimization problem. And another way to interpret this formulation is the defender-attacker-defender framework from the military operations literature. And this has been studied extensively in many different settings. And the robust optimization literature focuses on more abstract structural descriptions of D and function G here and the properties therein. The defender-attacker-defender framework would focus slightly more on, for example, structures of D that arise from more physical structures, for example, networks. Now we're going to see a connection between these two elements at the same time from our work. So connecting both to the type of abstract structural analysis in robust optimization, as well as a more physical structure analysis from the DAD framework. And also this also falls under the sequential zero-sum game category, which we won't really go into details. We don't have too much to say with regard to substantial connection between this literature, but nonetheless, we can think of this overall sequential decision problem as a sequential zero-sum game. Zero-sum meaning that we're working against defender and attacker are working with the same objective function, one to minimize and the other one to maximize this function. So let's talk about the technical aspect a little bit first. So looking at this question, we have minimization, maximization, and minimization, and the inner one is a network flow problem. This has been shown to be theoretically intractable in the sense it's NP hard, and we can't really solve large problems. And there has been a lot of plausible approaches from the defender, attacker, defender literature, from the military operations literature, proposing different heuristics as well as exact methods to solve this kind of questions. And again, this is not an exhaustive list. There has been many interesting, great works in this area. But by and large, these methods can solve medium scale problems, 100 to 1,000 node networks. Networks in the sense we talked about, the inventory and distribution network. But in our case, the national, if we talk about a national medical supply chain, we're talking about on the order of 100,000 nodes. This is because we can think of the, for every county, we need to have stockpiles and as well as dispensing sites, 10, 20 dispensing sites. And if we say there's a few thousand counties, then that immediately gets us to the order of 100,000. So basically that is to say that it's difficult to really solve this problem precisely and tractable at the same time. So then we take the perspective as follows in order to try to resolve this challenge here. So we can think of this question as not a two-stage min-max-min with linear constraints and objective function. We can think of this as a min-max problem with a non-linear function here without constraints. So basically I'm lumping everything within the last stage, the minimization network flow stage, into a big function. So so G is a function of B and it's a non-linear function of B. Okay. So, and then overall we can think of this as single stage robust optimization with non-linear optimization, non-linear objective here. And one in particular, one reason that G of D is nonlinear is because the optimal solutions, F and S, optimal solutions for the inner minimization, they are nonlinear in the parameter D here. And the shapes are probably not correct, but I just want to demonstrate the fact that the optimal solutions are nonlinear functions of the parameter D's. So one way to try to solve this problem approximately is to say, hey, why don't we, instead of trying to look for this nonlinear optimal solution, why don't we restrict our attention in the class of linear functions or affine functions for the optimal solution functions? And here I'm saying that for example, we can use the what we call affine envelope. So the tightest affine bound, sometimes it's not unique, but I said we're using affine bound here to try to approximate G and then solve this question. So once we approximate G with linear versions of the summons or the linear versions of the approximations of the optimal solution functions, then the whole problem becomes a linear robust optimization problem. We have a min-max and then linear inside. So that's going to give us the classical robust optimization problem, and we know how to solve it. It's tractable, is nice, and we can study it. And of course, there's going to be a loss in terms of the solution because we are no longer solving the original problem. We're solving some surrogate of it using affine approximations of the optimal solution function F and S. So, so a main result from our paper, theoretically, is that we showed that under certain technical conditions, affine approximation is exact. Meaning that affine approximation gives us exactly the same optimal value as if we were solving the original problem without imposing this affine assumption here. Okay. And that technical assumption is that the network, the underlying distribution network, is a tree here. And by that, I mean, we have a hierarchical structure for the stockpiles as well as delivery system, assuming that, for example, and this arises naturally from a context like ours, because we can think of federal level, state level, city level stockpiles as being just different levels of partitions of the country, and they have a nested structure. And by assuming that the network is tree basically means that we assume that we can transport materials from any node to any of its children nodes, but not across. So for example, state A can transport things to every city within the state, but not the cities in the neighboring state. And this assumption may not be satisfied in some cases. For example, New York City can be served by 3 different states. But that's okay, because this optimality result, meaning saying that affine approximation is exact, even though that relies on this assumption, the actual functionality of this approximation doesn't rely on any assumption of a network. It doesn't have to be a network at all. So, so basically we're saying that the solution technology we're trying to apply applies in all situations. And we're going to show that it performs well experimentally, but it's just under certain technical assumptions that are plausible, we can show even more. We can show that theoretically the approximation is actually exact. And that's on top of the tractability result that we have. So that we can actually solve large problems like we were looking at 100,000 on that order. And I'm not going to go into all the proof steps, but a key idea within the proof is to think constructively about what optimal solution functions would look like. So here, for example, the flow functions and then the demand loss functions as functions of the demand parameter B here. What do they look like? And if we can find certain solutions, optimal solutions that are the optimal and feasible, and so they compose into this overall loss. For example, I represent the optimal solution functions for demand loss variable as the 2 figures on the left before the equal sign. So assume these are the nonlinear optimal solution functions. So demand loss as a function of D, multidimensional vector D. Then if the following happens, then affine is optimal. And the following is, if we can use the tightest affine bound or affine envelope to approximate these 2 optimal solution functions and claim that the sum of these 2 envelopes is exactly the tightest affine bound, upper bound for the original demand loss function, the overall loss, then we're done. Basically, this is saying that we have, if we can constructively find demand loss functions, or in general, optimal solution functions, such that the sum of the affine envelopes of these functions is the envelope of the sum of these functions. So we're interchanging the operation of sum and summing and enveloping. Then this, the whole affine optimality result would go through. And here the key property for the optimal solution function that we constructed is that these optimal solution functions can be univariate complex. In many cases, including ours, the optimal solution is not unique. So we have to identify such structure for one of the optimal solutions and then prove this. And from the figure, it may look pretty obvious or trivial how this can happen. For example, how do we, the sum of envelope is the envelope of sum. Actually, if we look at, but that's actually not true. It's actually a very difficult to satisfy criterion. Even if, for example, I have a 2-dimensional convex situation. So assuming that we're looking at 2 convex functions on the left-hand side as summands, and want to see if the envelope of the sum is the sum of the envelope, and that happens to be not true, even for this this pair of simple 2-dimensional convex functions. So that's I think that's just a counterexample to say this doesn't really happen all the time, and actually I think that's an underlying numerical reason that we can show here that why affine optimality result doesn't really show very often in the robust optimization literature. But that's another line of discussion. So, okay, so given the technical assumption, our affine heuristic is optimal. But under general situations, if we remove this assumption about tree structure, if we apply this heuristic on the general network, we also want to see how it performs. So we tested this heuristic on different networks, 5,000 random instances, against an exact method. This exact method, being computationally challenging, it doesn't solve most of the instances, but it does give a valid lower bound. So with a valid lower bound, because we're trying to minimize, with a valid lower bound, we can then compare the solution from affine heuristic and see what is a conservative estimate of the solution gap between an affine approximation and the actual exact solution. So first thing I want to point to is that the affine strategy solves 100% of the 5,000 random instances within 4 hours. In fact, the average solution time is a few seconds, whereas the exact method only solves 2% of the problems. And that's why the average runtime goes up to 4 hours, close to 4 hours. And if we plot out the conservative estimation of optimality gap for our affine approximation, we see that it's, so the vertical axis shows the gap. We see that it's always under 10%. And that is true for different network sizes, and especially an especially good feature that we found from this set of experiments is that the optimality gap does not scale with the size of the network. So the horizontal axis shows us the number of nodes for the networks that we're testing for instances. And the optimality gap for affine heuristic doesn't really go up with regard to that. So then we would have confidence of applying this to an even larger network. And also, again, note that this gap is an estimation. So it's and it's a conservative estimation. So the actual gap might be even much more small. Okay. So given that technology, we were then able to resolve a question that has been investigated in this book called Prepositioning Antibiotics for Anthrax from the National Academies Press. It's a very well-written book, like all the books I've written, read from the National Academies Press, and I encourage you to read it if you're interested in this topic. So basically what they were trying to do is to lay out different, first look at different options for storing inventory. So each fan-shaped area corresponds to one type of inventory storage option. The one I'm circling here is the SNS and other federal stockpile is sort of the highest level stockpile that is far away from the population. And so basically, the further away we are from the center of the circle, the further away it's saying this strategy is far from the population to be served. So, for example, for medkit and personal stockpile, this is the kind of solution strategy or pre-positioning strategy for inventory that is close to population, and so the shaded area is close to the center of the circle. So basically, that's a way for them to lay out. There are different options to position inventories, different levels of pre-positioning of inventory towards the population. And they found that there's so basically they tried out 3 distinct strategies of inventory pre-positioning and tried to understand the cost as well as the health effect related to the 3 strategies. The first one is no pre-positioning, so everything is held at the national level, federal stockpile. And that has a certain cost and certain deaths averted. So we can think of that as health benefit. And that, I think they just normalize everything to start from that point as origin. And the second strategy is to pre-position into some local warehouses. That's going to give some increase in the health benefit as well as an increase in cost, understandable. Okay. And the last option they tried is to say, what if we try to calculate the cost and health benefit for storing everything at people's homes? So that's pre-positioning to the maximum. And these 3, if we just look at these 3, basically the one thing striking feature is that there's increasing marginal cost, a huge increase in marginal cost in increasing health benefits. Right? So as we increase health benefit, we require different pre-positioning strategies, and there's a increase in marginal cost, given the 3 points, 3 different strategy scenarios they discussed. But what we are doing, so given the technology, we can actually fully model this problem with a full description of the network and with a precise description of the Pareto frontier. And the data we got mostly from public available sources, including this book, and also some other things like USPS delivery times and efficiency. I went through some YouTube videos to see how fast the mailman would deliver things in their mailboxes in a complex, for example. So we came up with a similar figure. So this figure is transposed from as compared with the previous one, but it tells a similar story here, and with more detailed description, quantified description. So on the horizontal axis, I have the number of percentage of deaths averted. On the vertical axis, this is the cost for maintaining this inventory and distribution system. And we see that as we go towards the higher end of health benefit, there's a very large increase in marginal cost for in order to run the system. And that's in line with what the National Academy's Press book talked about. And we can, and given the detailed modeling here, we can then go into any solution detail to understand why this is happening. For example, in this case, I'm listing out 4 different solutions, inventory solutions, along this line, this trade-off curve, this Pareto frontier. And so every box corresponds to a particular optimal solution, inventory pre-positioning strategy, at a particular point. And so here, the first one corresponds to a percentage of death averted as 60%, and the strategy that is optimal for that case, for that target, is to have most things upstream, federal level, state level, etc. But if we go towards a much higher health target, if we want to save 92.5% of the population, then it happens that the optimal solution is going to push everything towards the home pre-positioned location. So everyone should have a home kit, or most people should have a home kit. So this is the kind of analysis that we can perform with our detailed machinery here. Yet another type of thing we can look at, for example, is to change the reaction time. So that's an element that we can also tune a little bit in this model, because the reaction, we can think of reaction time as the time it takes from the infection of people to the actual start of the deployment of the materials. And that's going to impact health loss, because health benefit, because we said the treatment delay is a main factor of loss in this model. And so here this graph basically shows that if we have a very fast reaction, then with the same amount of investment, we can save a lot more people. Or conversely, to save the same number of people, we can have a much lower investment cost if we have a fast reaction. Of course, that comes the risk of what if we have a false deployment? What is the cost of that? That's another piece of understanding that we need to have. Okay. Another analysis we can do is to think about different delivery modes. In this case, especially comparing the centralized distribution by USPS, so the red curve here, versus for example, a dashed black line showing the distribution that where people just come to the same place to pick up things. So the black dashed line is a pickup mode when everyone comes to the same place to pick up, and then the red one is distribution, where the mailman would just deliver materials door to door to people. And here, because of the number of potential size of demand, in many cases, it's easier to have people to pick up, or it's cheaper to have people and faster have people to all come together to pick up. And that is a situation when we have, we're not concerned about contagious disease. And if we're talking about anthrax, attack. But it may become another story if we want to talk about the pandemic preparedness. So that's a future discussion we can do. Okay. So in summary, we have a end-to-end modeling of inventory and capacity design for a responsive supply chain, a supply chain that can respond quickly to demand shocks that is both large in scale and also fast in the need to respond. And we showed that there is a good tractable solution technology to solve this. Not only the problem setting we have for Bioattack, but more generally the min-max network flow problem. And it's provably optimal under some technical conditions. And we showed that there's a direct application to understanding antibiotic prepositioning against anthrax attacks, and compared that with the existing studies commissioned by the national academies. And we briefly touched upon the fact that this actually connects with quite a few different literatures: public health OR, military security, robust optimization, as well as nonlinear optimization. And that's where direction that we're trying to go at the moment. Generalization of several results from the robust optimization literature from 2016 to now. And also potential applications of taking this robust nonlinear framework and solution technology and analysis of that to completely different contexts. For example, learning, machine learning, because a statistical learning problem is basically a minimization of the sum of empirical loss from different data samples. And so there's a particular explicit summation structure there that we can exploit, similar to what we have talked about in the summation of affine envelope in our solution technology. And also we can think of different types of applications in the defender attacker defending framework, which is designing resilient social networks. So the social network may exhibit very different characteristics, but maybe there are some structural results we can exploit from network analysis, network optimization. And so with that, I think we only have a few minutes left, but thank you very much for attending this talk, and especially want to thank my advisors and collaborators on this, and the Military and Security Society, as well as the Koopman Prize Committee. Also the editors and referees at Operations Research that gave us tremendous help on this paper. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Peter, for this outstanding presentation and exceptional work. We definitely look forward to hearing more to come. I know some folks don't necessarily want to ask questions while we're recording. So I just want to, in our remaining time, first say congratulations again for a very well deserved award. And I would encourage everyone who's watching this to connect with us on these handles, and we'd be happy to continue the conversation. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, and then we can open up for some questions as folks have some availability.